Morpheus, god of dreams, a sleep story from Greek mythology. A note to listeners: this is a storytelling adaptation based on ancient Greek and Roman mythology, drawing primarily from Ovid's Metamorphoses, our main surviving source for the god Morpheus. While the core mythological details are preserved, the lineage of sleep and night, the three Wanneroi brothers, the gates of horn and ivory, and the tale of Sakes and Alcyone. This retelling has been expanded with descriptive imagery, dialogue, and gentle narrative packing to create a calming, immersive experience for sleep. Some emotional depth and invented dialogue have been added to bring the ancient tale to life for modern listeners. Rest well as you drift into this ancient story of dreams, told to carry you gently towards sleep of your own. Chapter 1: The Palace of Sleep. Far to the west, past the golden gardens of the Hesperides, past the edge of the mortal world where the sun's light grows thin and hesitant, there lies a valley that no waking eye has ever truly seen. It is a place of perpetual twilight, neither day nor night, but something suspended between the two. A stillness so complete that even the birds who fly above it fall silent and drift down to sleep before they know what has happened to them. This is the valley of Hypnos, god of sleep, son of Nyx the night and brother to Thanatos, who is death. And though these two brothers share the same dark mother, they could not be more different in nature. Thanatos comes to mortals but once, cold and final, closing their eyes forever. But Hypnos visits every mortal soul each night, gentle and temporary, offering rest so that they might wake again to greet the dawn. Deep within this valley, hidden inside the hollow of a mountain, is the cave where Hypnos makes his home. No sunlight ever enters that cave, not even at midday, not even when Apollo drives his chariot directly overhead. No rooster crows within 100 miles to disturb the silence. No dog barks. No branch creaks in wind, for the wind itself seems to hold its breath near that sacred, drowsy place. The only sound that exists there is the low, murmuring whisper of the river Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, which flows just outside the cave's mouth over smooth black stones, its voice like a lullaby that never ends. At the entrance to the cave grow poppies in great abundance, fields upon fields of them, their heavy heads nodding on slender stems, releasing a fragrance into the air, so soothing that anyone who breathes it feels their eyelids grow heavy, their thoughts grow soft and slow, their worries dissolve like morning mist beneath a rising sun. It is said that Hypnos himself gathers these poppies each evening and scatters their petals through the mortal world, one drifting down over every bed where a tired head lies waiting for rest. Inside the cave, upon a bed of black feathers so soft it seemed to swallow the shape of whoever lay upon it, Hypnos himself slept. For even the god of sleep must rest, must dream his own long dreams in the darkness of his own making. He was not an old god, not withered or gray, as some might imagine, but rather ageless and smooth, his face untroubled by any care, his breathing so slow, and even that centuries might have passed between one breath and the next. And around him, filling every corner and hollow of that vast cave, lay his children, the countless Waniroi, the spirits of dreams themselves. They numbered beyond counting, as many as the stars scattered across the night sky, as many as the grains of sand along every shore in the world, as many as the leaves that fall from every forest when autumn comes. Most of these dream spirits were nameless, formless things, drifting like smoke, waiting for their nightly task of visiting some sleeping mortal with visions both strange and mundane. But among these countless siblings, 3 stood apart, for they alone had been given names, and they alone possessed the great gifts that made their father proud. The first of these was Morpheus, whose name in the old Greek tongue meant the shaper, or the one who forms. Of all his brothers and sisters, Morpheus alone had been given the power to take on the exact appearance of any human being, their walk, their voice, the particular way they held their hands when they spoke, the small habits and mannerisms that made each person unmistakably themselves. When Morpheus appeared in a dream, he did not simply resemble the person he imitated. He became them so completely and convincingly that the dreamer could not tell, even for a single heartbeat, that they were speaking with a spirit, and not with the person they loved or feared or missed. The second brother was called Phobter by the gods, though mortals more often knew him as Aislos, the one who resembles. His gift was different from his brothers. He could not take human shape, but he could become any animal that walked the earth, swam the seas, or flew through the sky. When a dreamer found themselves suddenly face to face with a lion, or riding upon the back of some great winged serpent, or fleeing from a pack of silent wolves through a forest that existed nowhere in the waking world, it was Phobter who had shaped that vision. The third brother, gentlest and strangest of the 3, was Phantasos, whose name meant appearance or fantasy. He alone among the 3 had no interest in living things at all. Instead, he shaped himself into objects: a crumbling stone, a golden crown, a ship tossed on painted waves, a mountain that wept water instead of snow. When dreamers found themselves wandering through impossible landscapes, when the very earth beneath their feet seemed to breathe, or the walls of their childhood home seemed to bend and fold like paper, it was Phantasos who had woven that particular strangeness into being. Together, these 3 were known as the Waniroi, the dream shapers. And each night, when Hypnos closed his own heavy eyes, he would send his 3 sons forth into the world to visit the sleeping minds of mortals. Most nights, the tasks were simple comfort for a grieving widow, a joyful reunion imagined for a soldier far from home, a strange and harmless adventure for a child who had eaten too much honey cake before bed. But there was one particular night, a night that would become legend, retold across the ages, when Hypnos was called upon for something far more solemn than the usual gentle visions of sleep. Before that story unfolds, it is worth understanding the paths these dreams took to reach the sleeping world. For the ancient poets tell us that dreams do not simply appear from nowhere. They must pass through one of two gates that stand at the boundary between the realm of sleep and the waking world of mortals. The first of these gates was carved from gleaming ivory, smooth and polished and beautiful to behold. But this beauty was deceptive, for the dreams that passed through the ivory gate were false illusions without truth, visions that promised things that would never come to pass, warnings that meant nothing, joys that could not be trusted. The ancient Greek word for ivory, *elephas, held within it an echo of the word for deception, and the poets believed this was no accident. Beauty, they seemed to say, does not always carry truth within it. The second gate was carved from horn, plain, unadorned, humble in its appearance compared to its ivory companion. Yet, it was through this modest gate that the true dreams passed, visions that carried real meaning, warnings that mortals would do well to heed, glimpses of what was actually happening in the world beyond the dreamer's closed eyes. Horn is translucent when held to the light. The old poet said, just as truth allows itself to be seen clearly, without deception, without artifice, Morpheus, of all the Waniroi, was the only one skilled enough, trusted enough, to be sent through the gate of horn when the message he carried needed to be believed absolutely. When a king needed to know something of great importance, when a queen needed a truth too heavy to be told any other way, when the boundary between dream and waking reality needed to bend just enough to let something true slip through. It was for this reason that when a request came to Hypnos's cave one evening, a request carried by the swiftest of all the gods' messengers, it was Morpheus, and Morpheus alone, who was called forward from among his countless siblings. But to understand why that request came, we must first travel far from the Valley of Sleep, across the wine-dark sea, to the kingdom of Trachis, where a king and queen loved each other so completely that their devotion would become the reason the god of dreams stepped forward from the shadows and into legend. There, in a palace overlooking the restless waters of the Aegean, lived Ceyx, son of the morning star, and his beloved wife Alcyone, daughter of Aeolus, keeper of the winds. Their love was the kind that poets sing of and mortals envy, steady, deep, and true. And it was this love, tested by tragedy, that would summon Morpheus from his cave of poppies and send him across the world to deliver a message no mortal heart wishes to receive. Let us turn now to their story, for it is there that the true tale of Morpheus begins. Chapter 2. The King and Queen of Trachis. In the kingdom of Trachis, nestled between green hills and the restless blue waters of the sea, there ruled a king named Ceyx. He was the son of Eosphorus, the morning star himself, and something of his father's gentle luminance seemed to linger in him, a calm and steady light that made him beloved by all who knew him. He ruled with fairness, settled disputes with patience, and never raised his voice in anger, even when provoked. The people of Trachis considered themselves fortunate to live under his rule, and merchants and travelers who passed through the kingdom often remarked that they had never seen a land so peaceful, so well tended, so quietly content. But it was not only his people who loved Sakes. His wife, Alcyone, loved him with a devotion so complete that the old poets struggled to find words worthy of describing it. Alcyone was the daughter of Aeolus, keeper of the winds, a minor god who ruled over the great bag of storms and breezes that could either calm the seas or churn them into fury. Perhaps it was her father's blood that gave Alcyone her particular sensitivity to the moods of the sea, her instinctive understanding that the waters which seemed so calm and blue on a summer morning could, without warning, turn savage and merciless. Sakes and Alcyone had been married for many years, and in all that time, their love had never dimmed or grown ordinary the way that some marriages settle into comfortable routine. They still sought each other out at the end of long days, still found delight in small shared moments, a walk along the shore at sunset, a quiet meal shared after the palace had grown still, the simple pleasure of waking beside one another as the morning light crept through their chamber windows. "You are watching the sea again," Alcyone said one evening, coming to stand beside her husband on the palace balcony, where he had been staring out at the darkening waters for longer than she cared to count. Sakes turned to her with a smile, though there was something troubled behind his eyes that he could not quite hide from a wife who knew him so well. "I was thinking of my brother," he admitted. "Daedalion. It has been many months since his death, and still I cannot make peace with how it happened." Alcyone came closer and took his hand. She knew the story well, how Sakes's brother, transformed into a hawk by grieving Apollo after a terrible tragedy involving his daughter, had lived out the remainder of his days as a bird of prey, fierce and sorrowful, until even that strange half-life had ended. It was a story that still weighed heavily on Sakes's heart, a wound that had not fully healed. "There have been other troubling signs as well," Sakes continued, his voice growing quieter. "Strange omens, fires that burn without fuel, birds that fly in patterns the priests cannot interpret. I feel that the gods are trying to tell me something, Alcyone, and I do not know what it is." "Then let the priests interpret them," Alcyone said gently. "You need not carry every mystery of the world upon your own shoulders, my love. I have thought," Sakes said slowly, "of making a journey to Claros, where the oracle of Apollo might offer clarity that the priests here cannot provide. If the gods have a message for me, perhaps it is best I seek it directly rather than waiting for signs I cannot decipher." Alcyone felt something cold settle in her stomach at these words, a sensation she could not quite name, but that felt uncomfortably close to fear. "A journey," she repeated, "across the sea. There is no other way to reach Claros," Sakes said. "But do not trouble yourself, dear one. It is a short voyage, and I will return before the moon has completed even one full cycle." "No," Alcyone said, and her voice had taken on an urgency that surprised even herself. "Sakes, please, do not go by sea." He looked at her with gentle confusion. "What troubles you so? You have never feared my travels before." "I have never feared them, because you have never before proposed to cross open water in autumn," Alcyone said. And now that she had begun to speak, the words came pouring out of her. Born from some deep well of instinct she could not fully explain, even to herself. "I know these waters, husband. My father governs the winds that stir them into fury. I have seen ships broken apart like toys in the games of children, timbers scattered across the waves as if they were nothing more than kindling. I have heard the stories of sailors who never returned, of wives who waited on shores for husbands who had already been swallowed by the deep." "Alcyone, let me finish," she said, and there were tears now, gathering at the corners of her eyes, though she fought to keep them from falling. "If you must make this journey, then let me come with you. Let us face whatever danger there might be together, rather than have me sit here in this palace, imagining every terrible thing that could befall you while you are far from my sight." Sakes pulled her into his arms then, holding her close as the evening wind moved gently through the balcony's open archways. "My love," he murmured against her hair, "I cannot allow you to face such danger, even at my side. If something were to happen to this ship, I could not bear the thought of you suffering alongside me. Better that I face whatever risk there might be alone, knowing that you remain safe here in Trachis, than that we both should suffer the same fate." "And if something happens to you," Alcyone said, pulling back to look into his face, "do you think I could bear that any easier, simply because I remained safe on dry land while you drowned beneath the waves? Do you think a wife's heart breaks less because her body remains unharmed?" Sakes had no answer for this, for he knew in his heart that she spoke truly. But still, his mind was made up, as the minds of kings and stubborn husbands often are. "I will take every precaution," he said instead. "I will choose the sturdiest ship, the most experienced sailors. I will watch the skis for signs of storm and turn back at the first indication of danger. I promise you this, Alcyone, I will be as careful as any man has ever been upon the sea." Seeing that his mind could not be changed, Alcyone finally relented, though her heart remained heavy with a dread she could not shake. "Then at least promise me one thing more," she said. "Promise that you will think of me each night before you sleep, so that even across the distance of the sea, our thoughts might find each other in the darkness." "That," Sakes said, smiling softly, "is a promise I would have kept even without your asking." The days that followed were filled with preparations, the loading of provisions, the selection of the finest crew, the careful study of the winds and currents that would guide their journey. Alcyone busied herself with these preparations as well, for she found that activity helped to quiet the anxious voice in the back of her mind that continued to whisper warnings she could not silence. On the morning of Sakes's departure, the whole of Trachis gathered at the harbor to bid their king farewell. The sun rose golden over calm waters, and the ship, freshly painted, its sails new and strong, sat waiting at the dock like a great patient animal ready to be set free upon the waves. Alcyone walked with her husband to the very edge of the water, her hand held tightly in his. "The sea looks calm," she said, trying to find comfort in this small mercy, though her heart still beat with unease. "It does," Sakes agreed. "Perhaps your fears were unfounded, my love. Perhaps the gods will grant us fair weather and a swift, uneventful crossing." "Perhaps," Alcyone echoed, though the word felt hollow even as she spoke it. When the moment came for Sakes to board the ship, he took his wife's face in both his hands and kissed her with a tenderness that seemed to hold within it every year of their marriage, every quiet morning, and shared meal and whispered conversation they had ever known. "I will return to you," he said. "Before the next full moon rises, I will be standing on this very shore again, and you will laugh at yourself for having worried so." "I hope with all my heart that you are right," Alcyone said. She watched from the shore as the sailors raised the anchor, as the great sails caught the morning breeze and billowed outward, as the ship began its slow, graceful movement away from the harbor and out toward the open sea. She watched until the vessel became small as a child's toy on the horizon, until it became merely a speck of white against the endless blue, until finally she could see it no more. And still she stood there, long after the ship had vanished from sight, staring out at the empty horizon, as if her gaze alone might will her husband safely across the waters and back into her arms. She did not yet know that the gods above had their own reasons for taking notice of this voyage, reasons that had nothing to do with oracles or omens, and everything to do with pride, and the particular ways in which pride can bring even the most devoted of lovers to ruin. For Sakes and Alcyone, in their deep contentment with one another, had once made a careless jest, calling each other by the names of Zeus and Hera in their private moments of affection. A small joke born of love rather than malice, but one that had reached the ears of the gods themselves and had not been forgotten. And Zeus, who took offense easily where his own name and dignity were concerned, had been waiting for the right moment to remind these two mortals of the vast distance that separated gods from men. That moment, unbeknownst to Alcyone, as she finally turned from the shore and made her way back to the palace, had already arrived. Chapter 3: The Storm. The first days of the voyage passed peacefully enough. Sakes stood often at the prow of his ship, watching dolphins leap alongside the hull, feeling the salt spray against his face, allowing himself to believe that Alcyone's fears had indeed been unfounded, that the sea, on this particular crossing, would show him nothing but calm favor. The sailors, seasoned men who had crossed these waters many times before, moved about their tasks with the easy confidence of those who knew their craft well. They sang songs as they worked, told stories of previous voyages, shared bread and wine each evening as the sun set in brilliant colors over the water. For 3 days, the journey unfolded exactly as Sakes had promised his wife it would: smooth, uneventful, swift. But on the 4th night, as the ship sailed through waters far from any shore, far from any hope of shelter, the sky began to change. It started subtly, a darkening at the edge of the horizon that the more experienced sailors noticed first, murmuring among themselves with expressions that grew increasingly grave. The wind, which had been steady and favorable, began to shift, growing erratic, gusting first from one direction, and then another, as if some great invisible hand were toying with the currents of air. "Captain," one of the sailors called out, his voice carrying a note of concern that cut through the evening's calm. "Look to the west." Sakes joined the captain at the ship's railing, following the sailor's pointing finger toward the horizon, where clouds had begun to gather with unnatural speed. Dark, roiling masses that seemed to boil upward from the sea itself, blotting out the stars one by one as they spread across the sky. "That is no ordinary storm," the captain said quietly, his weathered face creased with worry. "I have sailed these waters for 30 years, my king, and I have never seen clouds move with such speed, such purpose." Even as he spoke, the first gust of true wind struck the ship, so sudden and forceful that several sailors staggered and grabbed for the railing to keep their footing. The sea, which had been gentle just moments before, began to swell and churn, waves rising higher than any they had encountered thus far in the journey. "Furl the sails," the captain shouted, his calm demeanor cracking under the urgency of the moment. "All hands, secure the rigging. We must ride this out as best we can." What followed was a night that would haunt the survivors, had there been any survivors to carry the memory forward. The storm that descended upon Sakes's ship was unlike any natural tempest, for this was no ordinary weather, but the deliberate wrath of Zeus himself, called forth to punish 2 mortals who had dared, even in jest, to claim the names of gods for their own. The winds howled with a fury that seemed almost personal, tearing at the ship's rigging, ripping sails from their moorings, despite the sailors' desperate efforts to secure them. Waves rose to heights that seemed to touch the roiling clouds above, crashing down upon the deck with such force that the ship's timbers groaned and cracked beneath the assault. Sakes worked alongside his men, helping to bail water that poured relentlessly over the sides, shouting encouragement to sailors whose faces had gone pale with terror, doing everything a king and a man could do to save his crew and his vessel. But even as he worked, he could feel the growing certainty in his heart that this was a battle they would not win. The mast. Someone screamed, and Sakes turned just in time to see the great wooden pillar that had held their sails snap like a dry twig, crashing down across the deck and crushing 2 sailors beneath its weight before tumbling into the churning sea. The ship, now unable to be steered or controlled, became entirely at the mercy of the waves. It pitched and rolled with such violence that men were thrown from their feet, some tumbling overboard into the black, hungry water, their screams swallowed almost instantly by the storm's relentless roar. Sakes found himself gripping a piece of the ship's railing with both hands, watching as the vessel that had carried him so confidently from Trachy's harbor began to break apart beneath the storm's assault. Water poured into the hull from a dozen different breaches. The deck beneath his feet tilted at an angle that made standing nearly impossible. In that final chaos, as the ship began its last descent into the churning waters, Sakes's thoughts turned entirely to his wife. "Alcyone," he whispered, though no one could have heard him even if they had been standing close, for the storm's roar swallowed every human sound. "Alcyone, forgive me." He thought of her standing on the shore, watching his ship disappear over the horizon with fear already written across her beautiful face. He thought of her warnings, her pleading, her instinctive understanding of the sea's dangers that he had dismissed with the easy confidence of a man who had never truly understood how quickly love could be torn away by forces beyond mortal control. He thought, too, of the promise he had made her, that he would think of her each night before sleep claimed him, so that their thoughts might find each other across whatever distance separated them. As the cold water closed over his head, as the last of his strength gave way to the sea's overwhelming power, Sakes's final prayer was not for his own survival, which he understood now was beyond hope, but for something else entirely. "Let my body find its way home." He prayed to whatever gods might be listening, even those who had brought this storm upon him. "Let the waves carry me back to her, so that she might know what became of me, so that she need not spend the rest of her days in uncertain hope, waiting for a return that will never come." The sea, indifferent to prayers and promises alike, swallowed him without answer, and the ship that had carried Sakes from his kingdom broke apart entirely, its timbers scattered across miles of churning water, its crew lost to the depths along with their king. By morning, the storm had passed as swiftly as it had arrived, leaving behind only calm waters and clear skies that gave no hint of the tragedy that had unfolded beneath them during the night. The sea, having claimed what the gods demanded of it, returned to its gentle blue tranquility as if nothing at all had happened. But far away in Trachy's, Alcyone knew nothing of this. She continued her daily vigil, watching the horizon each morning for any sign of her husband's returning ship, counting the days until the full moon he had promised would mark his safe return. She prayed constantly during those anxious days, to Hera especially, queen of the gods and patroness of marriage, begging for her husband's safe passage across the waters that had always filled her with such instinctive dread. She made offerings at the temple. She lit candles each evening and watched their flames flicker in the darkness, imagining that somehow their light might guide Sakes's ship safely home. Great Hera, she whispered one evening, kneeling before the goddess's altar with her hands pressed together in supplication. You who understand the bonds of marriage better than any other deity, please watch over my husband. Please bring him safely back to me. I ask for nothing else in this world but his safe return. She did not know, could not have known, that her husband already lay among the dead, his body carried by indifferent currents toward a shore that even now was drawing closer with each passing hour, as if some final mercy remained even amid the tragedy. The fulfillment of Sakes's last prayer, that his body might find its way home to the wife who loved him. High above, on Olympus, Hera had indeed heard Alcyone's prayers, day after day, each one more desperate and heartfelt than the last. And though the goddess could do nothing to undo what her husband Zeus had already set into motion, though Sakes's fate had already been sealed by the storm that claimed him, Hera found herself moved by a compassion she had not expected to feel for two mortals who had, however innocently, offended her husband's pride. She could not bring Sakes back to life. Even the queen of the gods did not possess such power over death once it had claimed its due. But she could, perhaps, offer Alcyone something almost as important, the mercy of truth, delivered gently, rather than leaving the poor woman to suffer in endless uncertainty, hopping against hope for a return that would never come. It was this compassion that led Hera to call for her most trusted messenger, the goddess Iris, she who could travel along the arc of the rainbow between heaven and earth, faster than any other divine being. Iris, Hera said, as the rainbow goddess appeared before her throne, her multicolored robes shimmering like light through water. I have a task for you, one that requires both speed and gentleness in equal measure. I am ready to serve, great queen, Iris said, bowing before Hera with the easy grace of one long accustomed to carrying out the commands of Olympus. There is a woman in Trachis, Hera continued, named Alcyone, whose husband has perished at sea, a fate decreed by my husband's hand, for reasons that need not concern you now. She prays to me each day, begging for his safe return, unaware that he is already lost to the waves. I cannot bring him back to her, but I can, perhaps, spare her the cruelty of false hope. What would you have me do? Iris asked. Travel to the cave of Hypnos, god of sleep, Hera instructed. Tell him that I require his assistance, that he must send a dream to Alcyone, one that will reveal to her the truth of what has happened to her husband, so that she might finally know his fate and begin to grieve as she must, rather than continuing to hope for what can never be. Iris bowed once more, and without further words, spread her rainbow wings and began her journey toward the distant valley where Hypnos made his home, the valley of eternal twilight, where poppies grew in fragrant abundance, and the river Lethe whispered its endless lullaby beside the mouth of a cave that no sunlight had ever touched. It was there, in that drowsy and silent place, that the next chapter of this story would unfold. the chapter in which Morpheus, god of dreams, would step forward from among his countless siblings to carry out a task that would ensure his name would be remembered for all the ages that followed. Chapter 4: The Messenger and the Dream. Iris traveled swiftly along her arc of shimmering color, leaving the golden halls of Olympus behind her, passing over mountains and forests and the great restless sea itself, until at last she came to the valley where Hypnos made his home. Even from a distance, she could feel the change in the air as she approached, a heaviness, a stillness, a gentle pull toward drowsiness that seemed to emanate from the very ground itself. The poppies that grew before the cave's entrance released their sweet, soporific fragrance into the air, and Iris found herself fighting against a sudden heaviness in her own eyelids, a temptation to simply lie down among the flowers and drift into slumber. But she was a goddess with a task to complete, and she pressed forward with determination, stepping carefully over the sleeping forms of countless small creatures, rabbits and birds, and even a few larger animals who had wandered too close to this drowsy valley and succumbed entirely to its influence. At the mouth of the cave, Iris paused. Inside, she could hear the deep, slow breathing of Hypnos himself, and beneath that steady rhythm, a softer chorus of whispers and sighs, the countless Waniroi, dreaming their own dreams even as they prepared to shape the dreams of others. Hypnos, Iris called out, her voice bright and clear against the muffled quiet of the cave, a stark contrast that seemed almost to disturb the very air around her. Gentle god of sleep, I come with a message from great Hera herself. There was no immediate response. Iris stepped further into the cave, her rainbow-hued robes casting soft, shifting colors across the dark stone walls, colors that seemed almost out of place in this realm of perpetual dimness. Hypnos, she called again, more firmly this time. Wake, if only for a moment. Hera's message cannot wait. Slowly, as if surfacing from some great depth, Hypnos began to stir. His eyes opened, heavy-lidded and unfocused at first, gradually sharpening as he took in the sight of the goddess standing before him, her presence like a burst of daylight in his shadowed domain. Iris, he murmured, his voice thick with the drowsiness that seemed to cling to him even in wakefulness. It has been long since Olympus sought my counsel. What message do you bring? Great Hera asks a favor of you, Iris said. There is a woman in Trachis, Alcyone by name, whose husband Sakes has perished at sea, though she does not yet know this truth. She prays each day for his safe return, unaware that he already lies among the drowned. Hera wishes to spare her the cruelty of endless false hope. She asks that you send a dream to Alcyone, a true dream, passing through the gate of horn. That will reveal to her what has become of her husband, so that she might grieve properly and find whatever peace can be found in such sorrow. Hypnos considered this request for a long moment, his sleepy eyes gradually gaining focus and clarity as the importance of the task settled over him. "This requires no ordinary dream," he said finally. "A vision that must be believed absolutely, that must carry the full weight and certainty of truth despite arriving in the form of mere sleep and shadow. This is not a task for Phobter, who shapes only beasts, nor for Phantasos, who shapes only objects and strange landscapes." "Then who?" Iris asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Morpheus," Hypnos said. "Only he possesses the skill to take on the exact form and voice of a mortal man, to make himself so convincingly sakes that his wife will know, beyond any doubt, that the vision she witnesses carries truth within it." Hypnos turned then, his gaze moving across the countless sleeping forms that filled his cave, searching among his numberless children until he found the one he sought. "Morpheus," he called, his voice gentle, but carrying an authority that cut through even the deepest layers of dream sleep. "Wake, my son. I have need of your particular gift." From among the shadows, a figure began to take shape, indistinct at first, like smoke gathering itself into form, but gradually solidifying into the appearance of a young man with quiet, watchful eyes and an expression that seemed to hold within it countless faces, yet to be worn, countless forms, yet to be taken. "Father," Morpheus said, his voice soft but clear, "what task do you bring me?" Hypnos explained the situation as Iris had relayed it. The storm that had claimed King Sakes, the grieving wife who did not yet know her husband's fate. Hera's request that the truth be delivered gently through the medium of dream, rather than left to cruel uncertainty. Morpheus listened with the quiet attention that marked all his interactions, and when his father finished speaking, he nodded slowly. "I understand what must be done," he said. "I will need to see this man clearly, his face, his voice, the particular way he carried himself in life, so that I might take his form convincingly enough that his wife will recognize the truth in what she witnesses. The circumstances of his death will provide what you need," Hypnos said. "The sea itself remembers what happened to him. Reach into those memories, my son, and shape yourself accordingly." Morpheus closed his eyes, and for a long moment he seemed to disappear entirely, his form dissolving into something less solid, less present, as he reached across the vast distance between the valley of sleep and the churning waters where Sakes had drawn his final breath. When he opened his eyes again, something had changed in him, a new understanding, a new knowledge of the man whose form he was about to assume. "I am ready," he said, and his voice, though still recognizably his own, had taken on subtle qualities that had not been there before, a particular cadence, a particular weight to certain words, echoes of a personality that had belonged to another man entirely. "Then go," Hypnos said. "Travel through the gate of horn, that your vision might carry the full weight of truth. And be gentle, my son, for the message you carry will break a loving heart, however necessary that breaking might be." Morpheus bowed to his father, then turned to the massive gates that stood at the boundary of the dream realm. One carved from gleaming ivory, deceptive and false, the other from humble horn, honest and true. Without hesitation, he passed through the gate of horn, and in that moment, the very fabric of his being shifted and stretched across the impossible distance that separated the realm of dreams from the waking world of mortals, carrying him swiftly toward Trachis, toward the palace where Alcyone lay sleeping, still unaware of the sorrow that awaited her. In her chamber, Alcyone had finally succumbed to exhausted sleep after another day of fruitless watching and desperate prayer. Her dreams, until that moment, had been fragmented and anxious, brief glimpses of ships and storms that dissolved before they could resolve into anything coherent, the natural product of a mind consumed by worry even in rest. But then, gradually, something different began to take shape within her sleeping mind. A figure emerged from the formless dark of her dream, growing clearer and more solid with each passing moment, until at last she found herself standing on a familiar shore, the very shore where she had bid farewell to her husband so many days before. And there, walking toward her across the sand, was Sakes. He looked exactly as she remembered him, the same gentle smile, the same warm brown eyes, the same particular way he tilted his head slightly when he was about to speak something important. But even in the strange logic of dreams, Alcyone felt something different about him, something that made her chest tighten with instinctive dread even before he spoke a single word. His clothes, she noticed, were soaked through, clinging to his form as though he had just emerged from the sea itself. His hair, usually neatly kept, hung in wet, tangled strands across his forehead, and his face, though still recognizably his own, held an expression of profound sorrow that she had never before witnessed in her husband's normally cheerful countenance. Sakes, she said, her dream voice trembling with sudden fear. What has happened to you? Why do you look so troubled? Why are you soaked as though the sea itself still clings to you? Morpheus, wearing the face and voice of her husband so perfectly that even Sakes's own mother could not have detected the deception, stepped closer to Alcyone across the dream shore's pale sand. My beloved wife, he said, and his voice carried all the gentle sorrow that the true Sakes would have felt had he been able to deliver this message himself. I come to you now not as your living husband, but as his spirit, freed from the body that the sea has claimed. Look upon me, Alcyone, and know the truth of what I must tell you. No, Alcyone whispered, even as some deep part of her recognized that this dream carried a weight, a certainty, that her earlier anxious dreams had never possessed. No, this cannot be. You promised me you would return before the full moon. You promised. I made that promise with every intention of keeping it, Morpheus said, speaking the words that the true Sakes would have spoken had fate allowed him one final conversation with his beloved wife. But the gods had other plans for our voyage. A storm rose upon us with a fury unlike anything the sailors had ever witnessed, no natural tempest, but one called forth by divine anger at a jest we made too carelessly, comparing our love to that of Zeus and Hera themselves. Tears began to fall down Alcyone's dream face, though even in sleep, some part of her mind understood that these were not merely the tears of imagination, but grief already beginning to take root in her waking heart. The ship broke apart beneath the waves, Morpheus continued, his voice, Saix's voice, filled with the tenderness of a husband trying to soften an unbearable truth. I fought as long as I could, tried to save what sailors I could reach, but in the end, the sea claimed us all. My last thought, before the waters closed over me forever, was of you, of your face, your voice, the years of love we shared together. I prayed only that my body might find its way home to you, so that you would not spend the rest of your days in uncertain hope, waiting for a return that could never come. Saix, Alcyone sobbed, reaching out toward the figure of her husband, though some instinct told her that if she tried to embrace him, her arms would close on nothing but empty air, on mist and shadow rather than solid flesh. Please, this cannot be true. Please tell me this is only a nightmare, that I will wake and find you safely returned to me. I wish with all my heart that I could tell you that, Morpheus said, and there was such genuine compassion in his borrowed voice that even he, a spirit who had witnessed countless human sorrows in his long existence, felt something akin to sympathy for the grief he was causing. But you must know the truth, Alcyone. You must know so that you can grieve properly, so that you are not left forever wondering, forever hopping in vain. My body even now drifts upon the waves, carried by currents toward the shore near our home. Go to the sea, my love. Find me there, and give me the proper rites that will let my spirit find peace. With these final words, the dream figure of Saix began to fade, his solid form dissolving back into mist and shadow as Morpheus's task drew to its completion. Alcyone reached desperately toward the vanishing figure, crying out his name one final time, and it was this anguished cry that finally woke her from sleep, gasping and weeping in the darkness of her chamber, the dream's truth already settling into her heart with a certainty that no waking logic could dispel. She sat up in her bed, her whole body trembling, tears streaming down her face, even as the palace around her remained silent and still, unaware of the tragedy that had just been revealed to their queen through the gentle, terrible mercy of a dream. It was real, she whispered into the darkness. Somehow, I know it was real. Morpheus, his task completed, made his way back through the gate of horn, back across the vast distance to his father's cave, where Hypnos waited to hear whether the difficult mission had been accomplished. It is done, Morpheus said, his form gradually settling back into its own quiet, watchful appearance, though something in his manner suggested the emotional weight of what he had just carried out. She knows now. She will grieve, but she will grieve with truth rather than false hope. You have done well, my son, Hypnos said, and there was pride in his voice, though tempered by the solemnity of the task they had just completed. Not every dream brings comfort. Sometimes the greatest mercy a dream can offer is simply the truth, however painful that truth might be. And so Morpheus's part in this story might have ended there, his task complete, his duty fulfilled. But the tale of Ceyx and Alcyone was not yet finished, for even as Alcyone wept in her chamber, accepting at last the truth that had been revealed to her, something else was happening along the shore near Trachis, something that would transform this story of tragedy into one of the most beautiful and enduring myths of transformation and eternal love. Chapter 5. The Halcyon Days. Dawn broke over Trachis with a pale, gentle light, and Alcyone rose from her sleepless bed with a heaviness in her heart that felt as though it might never lift. The dream still lingered in her mind with a clarity that no ordinary nightmare possessed. Every detail, every word her husband's spirit had spoken to her, remained as vivid as if she had witnessed it with waking eyes rather than closed ones. "I must go to the shore," she murmured to herself, dressing quickly despite the trembling in her hands. He said his body would be carried there. I must see for myself whether the dream spoke truly. She left the palace before her attendants had even risen, walking alone through the quiet streets of Trachis, past fishermen preparing their boats for the day's work, past merchants beginning to open their stalls in the marketplace, none of them aware of the sorrow that weighed upon their queen's heart as she made her way toward the sea. When she reached the shore, the very same stretch of sand where she had bid farewell to Ceyx so many days before, she stood for a long moment, staring out at the water, which shimmered peacefully beneath the morning sun, giving no indication of the violence it had unleashed upon her husband's ship. "Please," she whispered to the waves, to whatever gods might be listening, to the memory of the husband she feared she had already lost. "Please let this have only been a dream. Please let me be wrong." But even as she spoke these words, some instinct drew her gaze down the shoreline to a shape that lay half submerged in the shallow water, gently rocked by the rhythm of the tide. Alcyone's heart seemed to stop entirely as she moved closer, each step feeling heavier than the last, until finally she stood close enough to see clearly who lay before her. It was Ceyx, her husband, his body pale and still, dressed in the same clothes he had worn when he departed from this very shore, now waterlogged and torn from his ordeal at sea. "No," Alcyone breathed, sinking to her knees in the wet sand beside him, her hands reaching out to touch his face, his hair, searching desperately for some sign of life, though she knew, with the same terrible certainty the dream had given her, that no life remained. "My love," she wept, cradling his lifeless form against her, uncaring of the cold seawater that soaked through her own clothing. "You promised me you would return. You promised." She remained there for a long while, weeping over her husband's body as the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, as fishermen and gathering townspeople began to notice the queen's presence on the shore, and slowly, respectfully, gathered at a distance, uncertain how to comfort a grief so profound. But Alcyone, in her overwhelming sorrow, found that she could not imagine a life without Sakes beside her. The years of devoted love, the deep partnership they had shared, the promise of decades still ahead of them that had been so suddenly and cruelly stolen away. All of it collapsed within her into a single, desperate certainty that she could not, would not, continue living in a world that no longer contained her husband. "If the sea has taken you," she said, rising slowly to her feet, her eyes fixed on the gentle waves that lapped against the shore, "then let it take me as well. I will not be parted from you, not even by death itself." Before anyone among the gathering crowd could move to stop her, Alcyone ran toward the water, wading in until the waves rose to her waist. And then, with a final cry of her husband's name, she threw herself into the depths. But something extraordinary happened in that moment. Something that the watching gods, moved at last to compassion by the depth of devotion they had witnessed, chose to allow. As Alcyone's body struck the water, it began to transform. Her arms lengthened and grew feathers of brilliant blue and warm orange. Her form shrank and lightened, taking on the shape of a small, swift bird. And where Sakes's body had lain upon the shore, a similar transformation occurred, his form, too, shifting and shrinking, until he became a bird identical to the one his wife had become. The two birds, kingfishers, as they would come to be known, or halcyons in the old Greek tongue, rose together from the water where sorrow had nearly claimed them both, calling to each other with soft, musical cries as they circled above the waves that had once threatened to separate them forever. The gods, watching this transformation unfold, felt something shift in their ancient hearts. Even Zeus, whose pride had set this whole tragedy into motion, found himself moved by the sight of these two devoted souls, transformed rather than destroyed, given a new form of life that would allow their love to continue unbroken through all the ages that followed. And Aeolus, Alcyone's father, keeper of the winds, made a decision in that moment that would be remembered and celebrated by sailors for centuries to come. Each year, during the depths of winter, when the halcyon birds built their nests upon the very waves of the sea, Aeolus would hold back his winds entirely, calming the waters into perfect stillness for those precious days needed for the kingfishers to raise their young in safety. These days of perfect calm came to be known as the halcyon days, a brief pause in winter's usual fury, when sailors could trust the sea's temporary gentleness, when the memory of Sakes and Alcyone's transformed love brought peace to waters that might otherwise have remained forever dangerous. And so the story of Sakes and Alcyone, which began in such devoted love and passed through such terrible tragedy, found its resolution not in permanent loss, but in transformation, a reminder that even the gods, however wounded their pride might become, still recognized and honored the profound power of true devotion. But let us return, before this story closes, to Morpheus himself, the god of dreams who had made this whole tale possible through his gentle delivery of difficult truth. For centuries after this tale was first told, Morpheus continued his quiet work in the shadowed cave of his father, shaping dreams for mortals across the known world, taking on countless forms and faces, delivering messages, both joyful and sorrowful, as the needs of gods and the fates of mortals required. He remained, throughout all this time, exactly as he had been when he undertook the task of visiting Alcyone, quiet, watchful, gifted with an empathy that allowed him to deliver even the hardest truths with gentleness and grace. The ancient poets who told his story understood something profound about the nature of dreams themselves, that they exist in that strange, liminal space between truth and imagination, between the world we know while waking and the mysteries that unfold when we close our eyes each night. Most dreams, they believed, passed through the gate of ivory, carrying little true meaning, simply the mind's own restless wandering through fears and fantasies born of daily life. But some dreams, rare, precious, significant, passed through the gate of horn, carrying truths that mortals needed to know, delivered by Morpheus himself in whatever form would allow that truth to be received and understood. Even today, when we speak of falling asleep, of surrendering to the gentle pull of rest after a long day, we sometimes say that we are being carried into the arms of Morpheus, a phrase that has echoed down through more than 2,000 years of storytelling, a testament to how deeply this quiet god of dreams embedded himself into humanity's understanding of sleep and the mysterious visions that accompany it. Perhaps tonight, as you drift toward your own rest, you might imagine Morpheus watching over your dreams as well, shaping them gently, whatever form they might take, whether they carry deep meaning or simply offer peaceful escape from the day's concerns. Perhaps you might imagine the poppies growing at the mouth of his cave, their fragrance drifting across the world each evening, settling over every tired mind that seeks the comfort of sleep. The Valley of Hypnos remains in the old stories, exactly as it always was, silent, twilit, filled with the eternal murmur of the river Lethe, home to countless dreams waiting to be shaped and sent forth into the sleeping minds of mortals across the world. And Morpheus, gentle shaper of human dreams, continues his ancient work, passing through the gate of horn when truth must be told, through the gate of ivory when simple comfort or harmless fantasy is all that is needed. Somewhere, even now, in this quiet moment, as you find yourself growing drowsy, perhaps a poppy petal drifts down from that distant valley, settling over your own resting mind, inviting Morpheus to visit you as he has visited countless mortals before, gently, kindly, shaping whatever dreams await you in the peaceful darkness of sleep. Rest now, dear listener. Let the weight of the day fall away from you as poppy petals fall from tired stems. Let your thoughts grow soft and slow, like the whispered current of the river Lethe. And should Morpheus visit you tonight, in whatever form your own heart most needs to see, may his message, whatever it might be, bring you the gentle peace that only true rest can provide. The story of the God of Dreams is, in its own way, never truly finished. For as long as mortals close their eyes each night in search of rest, Morpheus continues his ancient, gentle work, shaping visions from the raw material of memory and imagination, carrying truths and comforts alike into the sleeping minds of a world that has never stopped needing his quiet, compassionate art. Sleep well, and may your dreams tonight carry whatever peace, whatever gentle truth you most need to receive. The end.